The dust of the Arizona frontier stretched as far as the eye could see, shimmering under the molten fire of the setting sun, and the creak of the wooden windmill was the only rhythm that broke the silence of John Mercer's ranch. John was a man hardened by years of loneliness, a cattle rancher who had fought drought, wolves, bandits, and his own demons, but nothing could prepare him for what he stumbled upon that evening when the desert seemed more alive with whispers than with wind. As he rode back from checking his north pasture, his horse snorted and pawed at something lying half buried in the sand, and when John leaned down, his heart skipped. There was a girl, no older than 17, her skin bronze, her hair black as midnight, her lips cracked with thirst, her breathing shallow, and the torn scraps of her buckskin dress stained with dust and blood told the tale of someone who had been hunted, wounded, and left for dead. He dismounted, crouching low, his shadow falling across her fragile frame, and the girl's eyes flickered open just enough for him to catch the glimmer of fear, pain, and a whisper in Apache tongue he could not understand, though the word sounded like a name, Tayana, before she slipped back into unconsciousness. And in that moment John Mercer faced the oldest question of the frontier: ride away and leave her to the desert's judgment, or risk everything by taking her into his home, knowing the Apache were fierce about their own and a single misunderstanding could set fire to his entire life. But John had buried too many regrets already, had lost a wife to fever, had watched neighbors die because nobody dared help in time, and he could not ride on, not when a human life trembled before him like a candle's last flame. So with a grunt he lifted her frail body into his saddle, mounted behind, and spurred his horse toward his ranch house, all the while scanning the horizon for the dust plumes of riders who might already be watching. The night came down swift and sharp, stars like cold nails hammered into black iron, and John carried the girl inside, laying her gently upon his late wife's bed, a place no one had touched in 3 years. He boiled water, crushed herbs from his small medicine chest, and stitched the shallow gash across her ribs with the shaking precision of a man who knew survival depended on steady hands. Every breath she drew was ragged, yet stubborn, and though she could not speak, her spirit clung to life with the tenacity of the desert cactus blooming in drought. And John found himself muttering prayers he had not spoken since boyhood, words to a God he was not sure still listened to lonely ranchers on forgotten lands. Outside, coyotes howled as if mocking his decision, and somewhere in the darkness the far-off echo of drums carried on the wind, a sound John's blood recognized instantly, for the Apache were a people who did not wander aimlessly, and if drums spoke, they spoke to warriors, and if warriors rode, they rode for blood or honor. John checked the girl's pulse again, slow but stronger, and whispered, "You're safe here, little one, at least for tonight," though deep inside he felt the unease of a man who knew tomorrow would not forgive him. The hours crawled like wounded snakes, and John dozed by the firelight, rifle across his lap, until the crackle of hooves woke him before dawn. He slipped outside into the gray half-light, scanning the ridges, and his gut tightened when he saw what the horizon unveiled. The rising sun cut silhouettes of horsemen, dozens, then hundreds, their lances glinting, their ponies swift as shadows, and in a moment the stillness of the land erupted with the reality. 300 Apache warriors encircled his ranch, their war paint gleaming red and black, feathers trembling in the morning wind, and the low hum of their chants carried like thunder rolling across the valley. John Mercer stood alone on his porch, one man against a tide of fury, his fence posts like toothpicks before the storm, and he knew in that moment that the choice he made the night before had set into motion a reckoning he could not escape, because inside his house lay a girl whose blood bound her to the warriors outside. A girl who had whispered a name with her last strength, a girl who might be the key to his survival, or the cause of his death. And as the first shaft of sunlight struck his ranch, John Mercer gripped his rifle tighter, his heart pounding with both fear and defiance, and whispered to himself, "Lord help me, because this day's gonna decide everything." The morning sun bled across the desert sky, painting the horizon in streaks of crimson and gold, but John Mercer saw only the steel of danger sharpening around him. For the Apache riders had closed their circle tighter, 300 strong, their ponies stamping the earth, their eyes dark and unforgiving, and the sound of their chants throbbed through the ground like the pulse of war drums. John's fence, his proud barrier against rustlers and coyotes, suddenly looked like twigs before a flood, and he felt the weight of 300 arrows trained upon his soul. Yet he stood tall on that porch, weathered hands steady on the rifle, jaw set with the defiance of a man who had nothing left to lose but his own skin. Then from the line of warriors a rider stepped forward, his mount black as midnight, his presence commanding, his war bonnet long with eagle feathers that caught the light like fire, and when he raised his hand the chants ceased, silence sweeping the land like a blade, and the chief's voice carried with the deep authority of thunder, "White man, you have something that belongs to us." John's stomach twisted, for he knew the girl inside was no ordinary fugitive. Her presence had stirred the storm, and her kin had come to reclaim her or to avenge her. John called back, his voice firm though his throat burned, "She was dying in the dust. I brought her in. She's alive because I did what any man ought to do." The Apache chief's dark eyes narrowed, weighing the words like an executioner weighs an axe, and after a moment he said, "You speak truth, rancher. But truth does not wash away insult. She is Tayana, daughter of my blood, stolen in the night by enemies who wished to shame us. We rode to find her trail, and we find her here, in the house of a white man. Tell me, is she your prisoner, or your shield?" John's heart pounded with the sharp weight of his predicament, for one wrong word could loose 1,000 arrows, and he raised his rifle slowly, not to threaten but to show he was not afraid, and answered, "Neither. She's a child who was bleeding her life out. I saved her because it was right, not because I seek gain. She is safe in my home until she can walk again. If you want blood for that, then take mine, but don't call me thief." The silence that followed seemed endless, broken only by the whinny of horses and the distant cry of a hawk circling above, and in that stillness Tayana's voice rose weak but clear from inside the house, calling in her native tongue words John could not understand, yet the way the Apache stirred told him those words mattered. The chief dismounted, walking slow and tall, and when he reached the porch his eyes softened ever so slightly, for the girl inside had whispered, "Father." The revelation cracked the tension like lightning across a dry plain. John stepped aside, wary yet respectful, as the great chief entered his home, and there Tayana lay, fragile but alive, her arms reaching for him, and the warriors outside bowed their heads as the bond between blood was restored. John watched in silence as father and daughter embraced, the chief's stern mask breaking with rare tears, and in that moment John realized that what he had stumbled upon was not just a wounded girl, but the very heart of a people's pride. When at last the chief turned back, his gaze fixed upon John, and he said, "You saved her life. For that, the Apache will not burn your walls nor spill your blood. But hear me, rancher, your land lies on the edge of many wars, and men with greed will come for cattle, for gold, for water. When they do, they will not spare you as I have. Remember that you stood alone today, and only her voice kept 300 arrows from your chest." John nodded, feeling the truth in those words like the bite of cold steel, and answered, "Then let it be enough that I did what I could. I ask nothing in return." The chief studied him long, then placed a hand on John's shoulder, a gesture heavy with meaning, and said, "Few among your kind act without coin. You are either fool, or rare man. Perhaps both." With that he mounted his horse, lifted Tayana gently before him, and with a signal, the circle of warriors broke, riding off into the dawn with thunder of hooves and a cloud of dust that lingered like the memory of judgment. John stood watching until they vanished, the silence after their departure louder than any war cry, and he breathed deep for the first time since the night before, knowing he had touched death's shadow and somehow walked free. Yet the story did not end with their departure, for as days passed whispers spread across the territory of the white rancher who had sheltered an Apache chief's daughter, and those whispers twisted into tales, some calling him traitor to his kind, others painting him hero of compassion. Soon riders came, not Apache but whites, land barons, drifters, bounty hunters, men who saw his act not as mercy but as weakness, and they sought to test him, to take from him, to measure if the rancher who defied 300 warriors would falter before greed. John Mercer found himself marked, not by the Apache, but by his own kind, for jealousy and hate rode faster than honor on the frontier. But deep in his heart, when he looked out across the wide, lonely land, he knew that when the dust settled, he had made a choice that mattered, a choice that proved even in the harshest deserts, humanity could bloom like a stubborn flower. And though the road ahead promised struggle, he carried the memory of Tayana's whispered, "Thank you," in her native tongue, words taught to him later by a trader who knew Apache, and it was those words that steadied his hand and heart as he faced the long frontier days. For John Mercer's story was not just of a rancher and a dying girl, nor of 300 Apache surrounding his fence, but of the eternal struggle of men on the edge of the world to decide who they would be when tested by fire. Some break, some burn, and some, just a rare few, stand tall like lone oaks in the storm. Dear friends, if this story gripped you, if it pulled you into the dust, the fire, and the heart of the frontier, then don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with friends, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful tales from history and legend. Every story we bring you is a ride worth taking, and your support keeps the fire burning. Until the next story, stay brave, stay curious, and keep riding with us.